Good morning. Howard Walpe, Director of the Africa Program, and I'm delighted to welcome everyone to the Wilson Center this morning. The subject of this morning is Rwanda. Ambassador Ariete will be discussing both economic and political developments in Rwanda and also the evolving role of Rwanda within the larger Great Lakes region. There's not been a lot of discussion about Rwanda recently, and I thought the program today, therefore, would be particularly timely. Michael Ariete has been American ambassador to Rwanda since November 2005. He joined the State Department in 1973 and, of course, a member of the Senior Foreign Service. Prior to assuming his current position, Ambassador Ariete served in the State Department as Director of the Office of West African Affairs, as Deputy Permanent Representative of the U.S. Mission to the United Nations in Geneva, Deputy Chief of Mission in Zambia, Director of the State Department's Office of UN Peacekeeping Operations, and Director of the Human Rights Office. So I'm very delighted to welcome him to the Wilson Center. I understand it's first time at the Wilson Center this morning. For those of you who may be new to the center, just a very brief word. The Wilson Center was established by Congress in 1968 as the living memorial to President Woodrow Wilson, as the first only American president to have a PhD, university president, former political science professor as well. The center has been devoted to his mission of bringing together the worlds of policy and the world of ideas. It's a neutral, nonpartisan institution to encourage debate, reflection, dialogue on every conceivable issue, both global and national. It's a great privilege to introduce to all of you Ambassador Michael Ariete.
Thank you very much, Howard. It's a great pleasure to be here at the Wilson Center. And it's a great pleasure to be able to talk about Rwanda. I have had the pleasure of being the American ambassador in Rwanda for the last 11 months or so, and still rate myself as somewhat of a new boy on the block. But I find that two bits of advice that I was given before I went to Kigali remain very much true. The first was that you shouldn't, if you go to Rwanda, sort of don't assume you can bring all of your impressions and stereotypes about Africa and apply them there, because Rwanda is different in many, many ways. And the second one was that when you talk about Rwanda, you will soon find that people are on two extreme camps. There are those who say Rwanda is the miracle child of Africa that has achieved in the 12 years since the 1994 genocide unimaginable progress and unimaginable success. And there are those who say it's all superficial and things are really not changed at all, and Rwanda is on a very, very shaky foundation. And as you know, I'll tell you the punchline in advance. As you would expect, the answer is somewhere in the middle. Neither extreme is accurate or fair. What I hope to do today, though, was to really give you, in my opening remarks, very much an overview of what's happening in Rwanda today, what's happening in the region, and to leave lots of room for questions and answers, because I always find that's the most useful aspect of discussions like this. Everything in Rwanda today goes back to 1994 and the genocide, when somewhere between 800,000 and 1 million people were killed in the course of 90 days. And while if you go to Rwanda today and you have just seen the movie Hotel Rwanda and you expect to see bodies still lying on the ground and devastation, you will be shocked, because Kigali has very few visible marks of the civil war and the genocide. Very much the city and much of the country has been rebuilt. What's below the surface, and this there is a bit of truth, in the impact on people and on the individuals is very, very hard to measure. You meet so many people who won't come up to you and tell you initially what happened to them, but all you have to do is ask, and you learn, well, 18 members of my family were killed under these circumstances. or yes, my family fled into Congo and we lived there in refugee camps for so many years, and then we came back. And therefore, the legacy of the genocide is very real and is very much a aspect of current-day Rwanda. I'm going to start talking about the region because I think that's quite interesting. As you all know, again, as part of the legacy of the genocide and the aftermath of that, Rwandan forces were in the eastern Congo for some time. There were deep strains between Kigali and Kinshasa. There were and are the remnants of the former military regime, now called the FDLR, who operate in the eastern Congo. And there was a long time of very, very bad tensions between the two countries. And that has very much improved, excuse me, over the last couple of years. And today, I'd say the relationship between Kigali and Kinshasa is as good as it's been in a very long time. There are no Rwandan forces in Congo. There are the beginnings of normal trade and commerce between the two countries. There are, depends on the number, somewhere between 8,000 and 10,000 FDLR fighters who are still in the eastern Congo. They are not an active threat to the government of Rwanda today. They are a potential force, and they're a destabilizing force, and they're wreaking havoc within the Congo. So these days, the FDLR is as much a threat to the Congo as it is to the government of Rwanda, and therefore it is really critical what happens as a result of in the end of this month when you have the second round of presidential elections in the Congo. And that impacts on Rwanda and the other neighboring countries as much as it does on the Congo itself. So we're all waiting to see and crossing our fingers that the results of that election are such that it will lead to a enhanced stability in the Congo and the increased capacity on the part of the government of Kinshasa to manage and exert its control in the eastern Congo. The other thing that's really sort of expands the region a bit, but I think Rwanda's decision to participate in the Darfur peacekeeping force is very, very important and symbolic of the new Rwanda, I would say. In Rwanda, the failure of the international community, the failure of the UN to act at the time of the genocide in 1994 is still very, very, very raw. And for Rwanda to today be participating in a UN peacekeeping operation, as it is in the southern Sudan, and to also be participating in a very major way in the African Union's operation in Darfur, I think is symbolic of a willingness of the Rwandans to sort of turn from having been looking inward to looking outward a bit more on the region. And I think that's a very important aspect of developments today. A third element I think I would cite is Rwanda's intention to join the East African community. This is not going to be cheap for Rwanda. Studies have shown that initially Rwanda will lose revenue as it lowers its tariffs and joins the EAC. But the Rwandans see themselves, they see their future as being an integrated part of Africa. And if you really talk to a sophisticated Rwandan analyst, they see themselves as having a lot of disadvantages geographically in terms of their size, in terms of the population, but an advantage of being a bilingual country, French and English, in the middle of a very large, growing East African community to the east and a potentially resurgent Congo to their west, with the natural lines of trade coming from eastern Congo through Rwanda, through Uganda, going towards the Indian Ocean. So they are really trying to position themselves to take advantage of that geographical and historical location. Relations with their other neighbors are getting better. Relations with Burundi are excellent at the moment, and relations with Uganda, which have been under some strain and which are, I'd say, in shorthand, very much personalized between the two presidents, are also getting better. The two presidents, President Museveni and President Kagame, met just about 10 days ago at their former school, common school that they had attended in Uganda. And so I'd say things generally are getting better. We, the United States, have been very active in encouraging this regional reconciliation, primarily through something which we call the Tripartite Plus process, which is an effort to, was started several years ago at a time when these countries weren't really talking to each other, and there was a big lack of confidence. And so we began a process called the Tripartite Plus, which aims to bring together policymakers and military people at various levels so that they can interact freely, they can build confidence. And one aspect of that is in the city of Kisangani, we have established something called a fusion cell, which is really just a way of exchanging information and intelligence, so that when rumors or stories of some activity of a military type happen, all of the countries involved have at least the capacity to share information, to develop a common perception of what's actually happening, and hopefully to take common action. So overall, I'd say the situation in the Great Lakes region is improving and has improved rather dramatically. Turning to the internal situation, I'd say there too, there has been a lot of forward movement in the last several years. As I said, in 1994, from everything I've been able to understand, the country truly was devastated. Not only in terms of, I think it's, if you count the numbers of people either who died in the genocide or were displaced internally or fled to the country, it's something like 2/3 of the population of the country was affected physically in one way or another, and all of them were affected psychologically. And the fundamental aspects of the state were destroyed. The schools, the hospitals, the police forces, the judiciary, the infrastructure. Everything was a real mess. And they have really been able to achieve a dramatic improvement in overcoming those obstacles since 1994. More difficult, of course, is the task of encouraging national unity and reconciliation. And one of the things the government decided early on was that they were not going to just be able to not act on the perpetrators of the genocide. And whereas the senior-most leaders of the genocide are being tried in Arusha, those who were the principals behind that, the reality is that there were very many other Rwandans who were involved to one degree or another, voluntarily, sometimes involuntarily, and they have relied on and there were at one point 120,000 people in jail, several. Say in 1996, 1997. They calculated that would have taken 100 years using the traditional judicial system to just bring those people to trial. So what happened is that the Rwandans have divided the categories of those involved in the genocide who are in Rwanda. And those who were responsible for what are called Category 1 crimes are going to be tried in the formal judicial system. But the vast majority of Rwandans who were engaged in the genocide are being tried under something called the Gacaca process. And Gacaca is a very complicated quasi-judicial process, which what I just will try to summarize for you is it's an effort to go back almost to the village level, to have an investigation of what happened in that particular community, to ask people, who died, who was responsible, and then to have the leaders, the traditional leaders of that community, come together to try to assess what was true and what was false. And if a lot of people have in fact confessed to their role in the genocide, and those people are being tried, they're attempted to be reconciled with the family members of the victims, and they are actually in some cases given community service as a penalty rather than jail terms, although some are also given jail terms. But the Gacaca process goes on week in, week out. There was a period of investigation and collection of information, but right now they're at the trial stage. And there are a huge number of people who are going to go through the Gacaca process. Numbers up to 700,000. I'm not sure that number will last, but it is a very significant number. And they're all being tried through these 9,000 Gacaca courts that are scattered around the country. I'll be happy to talk about that in more detail if you like. The other thing I wanted to to focus on, though, was the rebuilding of society and government. The formal judicial structure has been totally rebuilt and reorganized, and while still suffering very much from lack of capacity, you have new judges, you have trained judges, you have new prosecutors, you have a court system that I think, for the most part, people have confidence in. You have a rebuilt police force, and whereas in many African countries, the police are seen by citizens as a threat to themselves, and they're underpaid, and therefore they collect bribes, etc. Polls have shown that in Rwanda today, most of Rwandans have a sense of faith in the police and see the police as a force that's helping to build their own security. And security itself is probably one of the most fundamental things that has been achieved since 1994. You know, from a time when you couldn't walk across the street out of fear of being killed, or everybody was displaced, no one knew what was going on. Today, Rwanda is, once again, I would say, a very structured society. Rwanda has always been a structured society. It is one of the things that differentiates it from other African countries. But I do think that the average person believes they have a sense of personal security that is critical to moving forward on the broader goals of democratization and checks and balances in the new government. So that, I think, is critical. Parliament functions. Parliament I think, is growing in terms of its independence. And I'll come back to that in a minute. And because the other thing I wanted to focus on was corruption. Rwanda, for the most part, ranks very high in terms of African countries in terms of the control of corruption. So corruption is not the problem that is in other countries. It's not non-existent. Nobody should be so foolish as to think that. But in fact, it has really moved a long way and is not a major obstacle to development or economic growth. The other thing that Rwanda is implementing at this stage is decentralization. And when I first got to Rwanda, I said, well, gee, decentralization, you know, what's the consequence of all that? What it really is, I think it's twofold. Number one, it is an attempt to get services delivered directly to the people. They have now created 30 districts and then a larger number of sectors below that. And the districts and the sectors, rather than the central government, are going to become, or they're in a process of transition, the provider of services to the people, much as the way states do in the U.S. So you're going to have local authorities controlling teachers' salaries, controlling policemen's salaries, controlling development projects, etc., in a way that hopefully will be much more effective in terms of economic development, and also will have what I think is sort of the sub rosa in this, begin to cut away at the traditional Rwandan dependence on taking orders from the top in the central. And that when people write about the genocide and they say, how could this have happened? I say, well, but it was all ordered at the top. You know, the president said this, and it went to the ministers, and it went there, and it went down, and it all came down this chain of command. And I think in the Rwandan political thought is that if these districts have more power, then it sort of breaks this old process of looking exclusively to the center as the voice of authority. Again, we'll see whether that actually works out. I'd like to say that, you know, politically, Rwanda has a dominant party, the RPF, and it is there are a number of very small parties associated with it who work together basically in parliament. Rwanda does not have a vibrant, policy-oriented opposition party, and therefore many observers of Rwanda say, aha, you know, just as we said, it's really just a one-party state in another name without the political space, without freedom of political parties to form. It's more complicated than that. What is the case in Rwanda, and it's very hard for any of us as non-Rwandans to really understand, is a fundamental focus on, they would say, and not letting the past happen again. And by the past they mean the use of ethnicity to be the primary force in the way people identify themselves in society and the way that the government and society functions. So in Rwanda today, even though everybody knows historically you had the three groups, the very large majority Hutu group, a smaller number, about 15% Tutsi, and then a very small minority of Twa, you don't ask the ethnic question in Rwanda today. It is as bad as it just is not done. Foreigners certainly don't ever ask that question. Rwandans tend to, we think, assume they know who's who. But the point of this process is it shouldn't matter, that people should be in government or in positions of authority on the basis of their capacity and their capabilities, obviously in terms of their political connections. But I would argue that that's no different in Rwanda than it is in the United States or Belgium or Brazil or anywhere else. People who are in the inner circle, people who are friends of the president, people who the president trusts or the prime minister trusts, naturally are the ones he turns to give positions of authority. So sometimes they may be people who had been traveling with him or working with him during the struggle in 1994, or not. But there is a complexity to the way power is distributed in Rwanda that is far more complicated than simply a effort to say, well, it's this particular ethnic group or that particular ethnic group which controls all the levers of power. I don't think that's true. But I do think that, in fact, in today's Rwanda, there is no vibrant opposition offering alternative policies as opposed to criticism. There are a lot of critics, but very few people who are offering policies. And one of the comments I have sitting in Kigali is you hear a lot of people who are outside of Kigali, Rwandans who live in the United States or Canada or Europe, who have lots to say negative about the government, but who don't come back to try to change things themselves. And as far as I can see, the door is open. I don't know why they don't come back. Just a few words on the economic situation. Rwanda is still a very, very poor country. Per capita income is around $230. It has just recovered from where it was prior to 1994. I think I saw some statistics that basically said that a lot of the indicators of development are back or just up slightly above where they had been at the time of 1994. 90% of the Rwandans are subsistence farmers, and yet they have had 5 to 6% growth rates over the last 5 to 7 years. There are areas of growth potential. One of the things Rwanda suffers from is its physical location. It's landlocked. It costs more to ship a container of goods from Mombasa to Kigali than it does from Baltimore to Mombasa. So if you look at that statistic in and of itself, and you ask yourself, well, why, how come it's so complicated to achieve economic growth? Why don't the Rwandans do more to export? Well, what are they exporting? They're exporting high-value, low-volume goods like coffee, like specialty coffee. You may or may not be aware that Starbucks highlighted Rwandan coffee back in March. And the USAID and others have been working with Rwandan farmers to develop this specialty coffee industry, which is, you get a lot more for specialty coffee than you do for regular coffee. And that makes sense to export that. You can afford sometimes the air cargo of that. They're exporting Rwandan baskets, handmade woven baskets, to Macy's. Again, these are areas where it makes sense to export to the United States. I think really the growth in Rwanda is going to be in the region. It's getting the Kenyans and the Ugandans and the Congolese to trade, invest, work more with Rwandans. And that's why the opening to the East African community is so important. I think that really is a very important development that people haven't really paid enough attention to. We in the United States, well, let me say another thing on land reform. The average farmer in Rwanda has something like 1/4 of a hectare because families inherited land and the father divided his land amongst his sons. There are at least 8.5 million people in Rwanda, which is a country the size of Maryland. And as you drive around Rwanda, you see literally, every square inch of the country seems to be cultivated, including all of these hills, the land of 1,000 hills. You just drive around and from the bottom to the top, it's all cultivated. And it can't continue. There is no way you can keep subdividing the land over and over and over again. People can barely, in fact, cannot survive on a 1/4 hectare. You can't support a family. So land reform is critical. And how you do that is very complicated, it's very sensitive, and it's very dangerous because it's going to affect everybody. And the Rwandans are very much engaged in a very careful analysis of the land reform process. They've been helped by USAID and by the British through DFID, and there are new laws on land, the land tenure, land valuing, expropriation laws. All of these things are just being put into place with the intention that you will be able to somehow combine these very, very tiny plots of land to be able to have a capacity to grow more and to be economically viable. So I think that's also very important. Tourism is also growing by leaps and bounds. There were 4,000 Americans who visited Rwanda last year as tourists. And Rwanda is a long way, and it's very hard to get to. There are only two direct flights a week from Europe to Rwanda. And the fact that 4,000 Americans and a lot more others are finding Rwanda is reflected in new hotels, new tour companies, sort of a very ambitious plan to develop different tourist sites within the country. And so I think tourism will also be an engine for growth in the country. And also with the telecommunications sector. Rwanda, again, going back to seeing itself as a bridge between the Anglophone and the Francophone parts of Africa, is very much focusing on training people with some expertise in international telecommunications. There is an American company laying fiber optic cable all over the country. And you're going to be able to get the same kind of broadband support in Kigali and in Butari and later in other regional cities that you can in the United States. And that's remarkable, and I think a sense of the forward-looking aspect of the government. What are we, the U.S., doing? Well, number one, we are Rwanda's largest bilateral donor. Our funding is over $100 million a year. The vast majority of that is in the health sector. We are a very major player in the efforts to combat HIV/AIDS. And we're about to begin a really exciting new program to combat malaria with the goal of reducing by 50% under 5 child mortality rates within the next 3 years. And the experts tell me this is doable. Rwanda has had remarkable success in its HIV/AIDS program. We hope by the end of this coming year that every Rwandan who needs antiretrovirals, who's infected and able and needs those drugs, will have them. So you'll have almost 100% or close to 100% antiretroviral use by Rwandans infected by HIV/AIDS. And there's a very active program of prevention and education that I think is hopefully turning around the growth of HIV/AIDS. We're also working on in family planning. Family planning is critical for Rwanda and an area that the government probably isn't doing enough on yet, but I hope we'll do more. We're working in the governance sector. We have programs in helping the judiciary and helping civil society and the process of democratization. And we have also a program to work with Rwandans in peacekeeping. As I mentioned, they have their role in Darfur is symbolic of the role that Rwanda could play in peacekeeping both in Africa and around the world. We have a brand new $6 million program to help them there. And as I said, go back to where I started, we are working intensively with Rwanda and its neighbors to really try to break the back of this lack of confidence and tension amongst the countries of the Great Lakes. And while things are vastly better than they were, there is always a risk that things can go backwards. So it's not something where you can say, we've achieved success and we're going to step back. That isn't the case. You really need to continue. That, my friends, is a very quick overview of lots of issues that I am involved in dealing with Rwanda, and I'd be very, very happy to answer questions related to those topics I've touched on or anything else that you would like.
Thank you very much. Michael, please, would you like to take that from up there? Or? Okay, good. We are being live webcast today, and so when you introduce yourselves, would you please identify your name and your affiliation? I think we'll package questions, take about 3 at a time. Let's begin in the very far back, the 2 hands there.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for a very informative talk. This is Chuck Corey from the Washington File to Africa. Could you tell us a little bit more about the Macy's Basket Program and the Starbucks Coffee Program and what significant role they play in economic development of the country? Thank you.
Thank you. And right in front, right there. Mm-hmm.
Ambassador Arrieta, good morning. This is Robert Daguiar from Voice of America. In testimony before the Senate 1 year ago, you said 2 of your key goals would be, as U.S. envoy to Rwanda, would be to strengthen the democratic process and to promote respect for human rights. Now, this year's State Department Human Rights Report noted some positive trends in Rwanda, including active prosecution of sex crimes, a general respect for freedom of assembly and of religion, and government programs to help combat discrimination against women. However, here are a few of the human rights issues Rwanda still faces according to the same report. There are reports of unlawful killings by security forces, about 10 political prisoners, including former President Pastor Bizimungu, frequent restrictions on freedom of speech, and some restrictions on freedom of religion. Ambassador, what specific and concrete steps do you expect will be taken during your tenure as ambassador to address these issues of concern? What specific steps would you like to see taken to address these issues of concern? Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll take one there, and then we'll shift to the other side of the room next time.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Brian Murphy, formerly with USAID in Kigali. My question concerns the Gacaca process. You mentioned there may be as many as 700,000 persons going through that process. I just wondered if you could give us a flavor, your impressions, please, as to the support or lack thereof, either officially, well, both officially and among the populace of the country for that process. Thank you.
Thank you. Those are all very good questions. On Macy's and Starbucks, the main thing I would say is they create employment. There are, I think the figure is 8,000 women working in various cooperatives to fabricate baskets, and they do this at home, and they do it as in addition to their normal aspects of their life. And for many of these women, it is the only source of cash income they have, and maybe even the family has. As I said, 90% of the people are subsistence farmers. They grow what they eat, and there isn't a lot more. So it has brought a lot of income to rural women in particular, and there are other aspects of it too. I visited one of these. There's one of these centers. Women do their baskets, and then they all come together to sell their baskets to the cooperative, which is, by the way, a female-run process. There's some really extraordinary women who have taken the lead to develop this. And that brings together people whose husbands or families were killed in the genocide, and those women whose husbands or children were perpetrators in the genocide. And so you get people talking and collaborating in ways that you wouldn't and perhaps otherwise get. The same is true for the specialty coffee. There had been a time when people were pulling up coffee trees in Rwanda because they weren't making any money. But if you have the better quality coffee tree itself and a much more professional processing of the coffee, they have washing stations and they select the coffee, etc. And if you visit one, you see hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people involved in each one of these washing stations. And so again, I'd say it's primarily income generating and getting Rwanda's trade name known overseas, so that people think something good about Rwanda other than the genocide. That's very important. In terms of the democratic process and human rights, I think remarkable progress has already been made, and I'm extremely pleased with the cooperative nature of the relationship between the U.S. Embassy in Kigali and the Rwandan government. After the last human rights report was issued, the one you referred to, which is now a year old, we suggested to the Rwandan government that we sit down and talk about a lot of these issues. And we've had at least 4, if not 5, 2.5-hour discussions where the Rwandan side has been comprised of very senior members of the police, the judiciary, the media council, the Ministry of Public Information, the Foreign Affairs, the Gacaca Commission, everything. And we have gone through and talked about those various weaknesses that were identified in the Human Rights Report. You mentioned freedom of religion as one. Well, freedom of religion, it's a funny thing to think about in Rwanda, which is has as many churches per square mile as any place I've ever been. And the people are very religious, and there's a huge selection. The particular problem has to do with the group known as Jehovah's Witnesses, where they, according to their beliefs, do not participate in night patrols, which, especially in rural areas, individual Rwandans are asked to. And so at the local level, people say, this guy isn't a patriotic Rwandan because he won't participate in night patrols. At the top level of the government, they understand that this is just an aspect of the Jehovah's Witness belief, and they are in favor of alternative kinds of service. Instead of doing a night patrol, you do something else. And so at the top level, there's a dialogue. It's working between the various ministries and the Jehovah's Witnesses. It's when you get down to the local level that it sort of hasn't filtered through. But that is changing. Everything is improving. The same thing with the process of freedom of the press. There have been and there are problems in freedom of the press. But this year, not one newspaper or journal was seized. And as far as we know, no journalists were arrested. There were cases in which journalists were invited in for questioning by the police, but they were not arrested. So things are changing. That wasn't true 3-4 years ago. So I'd say we have achieved a lot, and we're very, very pleased with the dialogue we have with the Rwandan government, and we're looking forward to continuing that and to seeing additional reforms, because Rwandans themselves would acknowledge that there is more to be done in opening up their society. And on the process of Gacaca, it is a very, very complicated issue. The goal of Gacaca is to bring to justice those people involved in the genocide, as well as to promote national reconciliation. And there are tensions in those two goals, because what are you doing when you have a Gacaca hearing of what happened in 1994? You're opening it all up again. You're talking about what happened and who killed whom, and why things happened. And you're saying this individual who still lives in this community hasn't been punished, and that person has his friends there. And then you have people whose family members were killed during the Gacaca process and who are saying, I leave. Not only have I lost all my children, or I lost my husband, but I lead a miserable life because I don't have family members. I'm very poor. I don't think, and here is this guy who I know killed my family member. He's living across the street from me. How is that fair? So this tension between national reconciliation and justice is difficult. It's very difficult, and I don't think it's a perfect process by any means. But I also don't know what the alternative is, and nor does anyone else, given the numbers of people who are involved. So the goal is to complete the Gacaca process by the end of 2007, 2008. Whether they succeed in that or not, I don't know.
I'd like to ask a question of my own, and then we'll take up more from the audience as well. You mentioned that in Rwanda today, it is still basically taboo to raise the ethnic question, and you don't talk about ethnicity. Next door in Burundi, where you've also had a history of genocide, intercommunal massacres, and enormous polarization, there has been a very different approach to that subject of ethnicity, where it's been actually made ethnic categories are explicitly stated and identified within the Constitution and within various of the institutional arrangements, and where it's all on the table. I mean, there's a very much a higher comfort level of that general discussion. So much so that today, ironically, even though there are major political tensions in Burundi, no longer is it Hutu versus Tutsi tensions. There are other issues now. I just was wondering how the Rwandans see the Burundian case, and whether they feel threatened by that, or are they intrigued by it? I mean, what's the Rwandan take on what's happening in Burundi, which is a very different direction, even though there's some similarities in terms of the issues the two societies have had to deal with. That's one issue. Let me take a couple more questions. Back there, yes, right here.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Ambassador. I'm Ed Barber from Good Works International, and I wanted to go back to the Eastern Congo for a minute. I had certainly heard, as I think most of us had, that the Rwandan army formally cleared out of there, 2 or 3 years ago, whatever the time frame was. And so we hoped that that issue would largely go away. Yet I have heard from various NGOs here in Washington recently that one of the raps on Rwanda is they're still plundering Congolese resources. And when I said, but the army's out of there, the answer was, well, no, they're doing it through proxies. And I wondered, sometimes it may be hard to tell the difference between proxies and just criminal activity, but I wondered if you could expound a bit on that. Thanks.
Thank you. And then right down here.
Thanks. Chris Hennemeyer from IFAS. Mr. Ambassador, there are those who have observed that when one looks at Kigali, one sees a burgeoning economy, good telecommunications, commerce. They've put in trash cans in the city in the last couple of days, unusual for Central Africa. But the further you get away from Kigali, you get to Cyangugu, you get to Kibungo, not only do people remain incredibly poor, but many of the support mechanisms that were in place prior to the genocide, functional cooperative movements for agricultural produce, parastatals to purchase and disseminate agricultural inputs and agricultural produce, no longer function or have in some instances completely disappeared. And that there's a real dichotomy between economic life in the capital and elsewhere that's not being addressed adequately. If you could take a minute to talk about that.
Great. Thank you very much.
Okay. Gosh, you guys all have good questions. Ethnicity, yeah. The Rwandans are not critical of the process that's underway in Burundi. In fact, the relationship between the Hutu president of Burundi and the Tutsi president of Rwanda is excellent. Is excellent. The Rwandans, I think, well, again, you should be really asking this to the Rwandan ambassador, not me. But I'll tell you what people tell me. I will be repeating. Is that in a way they tried this before during the Arusha process? There was going to be a division of seats in Congress according to the different political parties, and the political parties at that time were pretty much ethnic based, and it didn't work. And and not only that, with the 1994 genocide and the incredible toll that was afflicted not only on the Tutsi minority but on many moderate Hutus. It's just sort of I think Rwandans today would argue we're past that stage. It just didn't work in our country, and we have to try something else. Now, changing mentalities is not something that happens overnight, and I think it's fair to say it's a generational change. And what I think is very exciting is the way that in elementary schools and secondary schools and colleges, the educational program is addressing Rwandan history and pointing to the problems that the way history was taught, the old interpretation of Rwandan society, how that all led to the genocide, and how we can't let that happen again. And to me, I don't know whether this will work or not, but I think it's very important that Rwandans see themselves as being able to benefit in terms of what the government does for them, regardless of their ethnicity, just because they are who they are. One of the positive things we see, for example, is if you look at, I don't do it by ethnicity, but I do it by language. If you look at the number of Francophone versus Anglophone students going into university, the vast majority of them are Francophone. What does that mean? That means that those are, for the most part, are people who grew up and lived in Rwanda. They're not people who came back to Rwanda having been exiles in Uganda or Tanzania, and where they became Anglophone or their families became Anglophone. So it just seems that there is equality of opportunity in Rwanda in ways that is critical for this experiment, shall we say, in succeeding in Rwanda. But the Rwandans are not critical of the Burundians for doing it their way. In terms of the Rwandan role in Eastern Congo, I'm not aware of any Rwandan military today being in Eastern Congo. There are militias in Eastern Congo who have in the past been friendly to the government, but they've been relatively quiet recently to the Rwandan government. And of course you have the FDLR, who are opponents of the Rwandan government, who are still, I would say, a major potential flashpoint and risk in Congo. Again, the logical way to get resources out of Eastern Congo is to go towards the Indian Ocean, go through Uganda or Rwanda. And I'm sure there are resources. There are minerals, for example, that are exported. I'm told that if you go to Rwandan export figures, you can identify tin and coltan that's produced in Rwanda, and then you have to add to that stuff that's been imported for transport from the Eastern Congo. So it's not like there is no traffic and it's being hidden. I'm sure there are Rwandan entrepreneurs of one kind or another who are making money out of the exploitation of resources in Congo. The problem, I would argue, is not that Rwandans are trying to make a buck by exporting resources. The problem is that the Congolese state is sort of non-functioning in Eastern Congo. So when it comes to collecting taxes, when it comes to levering export duties, all of those things, controlling the mines, watching out for environmental issues, that just doesn't happen. So, I suppose you could argue that in the absence of that, therefore, we all should be extremely altruistic and just ignore that and not attempt to be financially engaged in that part of the country. But that's not what's happening. But I don't see that as a major problem today. In terms of the urban and rural differences, you're absolutely right. I think Kigali is far more advanced than the rural areas are, and Rwandans would acknowledge that easily. Nobody attempts to argue that that's not the case. It's easier, obviously, to develop in rural areas because you have a larger concentration of educated people in the rural areas, and you have a much more infrastructure than you had in rural areas. That doesn't mean that the rural areas are totally being neglected or that there aren't plans for attempting to pull them up. And one of the things I think that's very important is this decentralization and the devolution of authority to the district governors. They're actually called the mayors. And I visited the Nyagatare district about a month ago, which is as far away from Kigali as you can get. And it's an area along the Ugandan-Tanzanian border. And I talked to the local officials there, and they're taking the initiative to build a four-year college there. They're taking the initiative to dig boreholes to assist in the watering of cattle. It's a rural, primarily cattle grazing area. There are lots and lots of things happening that are partially the result of central government initiative, but just as often the part of local initiative. And I think it's over time you will see more of a balancing of the two. But it's it's just also just based on statistics. If you look at, I'm sure the population of literate people in Kigali is much higher than it is in the rural areas. The number of women who are being educated is much higher in urban areas than it is in rural areas. The infrastructure, just having health clinics, et cetera, is better in Kigali than it is in the rural areas. But all of this is changing. One of the things that our HIV/AIDS program is doing is, in order to deliver the services to combat HIV/AIDS, what do you have to do? You have to build up rural health clinics, and we have rural health clinics in various stages of development happening all over the country. So things will change in time.
Okay, great. How about over here and then two down here?
Very much. My name is Julia Ernst, and I'm with the Leadership and Advocacy for Women in Africa program at the Georgetown Law Center. And I'm wondering if you can speak particularly about women's human rights. You mentioned some things about human rights in general, but as I'm sure you know well, women's vulnerability and lack of human rights is a significant contributor to their vulnerability to HIV/AIDS, and also some of the other issues you mentioned with respect to land and property, how the land goes from the father to the sons and on down. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about women's human rights in customary and civil law, and also at the leadership levels as well, for example, particularly after UN Security Council Resolution 1325. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Over here.
Hi, my name is Vernice Guthrie Sullivan, excuse me, and I'm the director of the American Bar Association's Africa Law Initiative. And we've done quite a bit of work in Rwanda in partnership with the Ministry of Justice in training for the community-based mediation councils and the like. And I'm wondering if you can unpack a little bit the support that you see will be needed in the future for the judiciary. During our work there, we were quite concerned with the kind of all-inclusive nature of the mediation law, the mandatory mediation law, which meant that rape even was subject to mediation before recourse to the formal system. I understand that the formal system is being stood up now, so, you know, especially in the interior, so there's an attempt to do a balancing act. But I'd be interested in hearing your views on the present state of the judiciary and the needs in the future.
Thank you. Could you hand the microphone right behind you? Great. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. My name is Severin Rugumamo. I'm a Wilson Fellow for 1 year here. My two questions. One of my questions is that the success of Rwanda on the political front was that it has been slow and hesitant in liberalizing its politics, and hence it has been able to consolidate the institutions before you open up. I want you to speak on that. And the second one is on the economic front, that there is inadequate initiatives to help the Rwandese get out of the monoculture economy. If you look at the policy advice that Rwanda is getting on liberalizing its economy, you end up de-industrializing Rwanda, because the war-torn economy like Rwanda cannot compete with European and American manufacturing firms. And two, liberalizing the agriculture, there is no way those peasants in Rwanda can compete with highly subsidized farmers from the U.S. I want you to comment on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Michael.
Okay, women's human rights. You may or may not know, but I think by the Rwandan constitution, I think it's 33% of all of the seats in parliament and in lower levels of government are to be reserved for women. So they have to be there. During the voting, at least 33% of those elected have to be women. In fact, the number who were elected in the last general election is 49%. And today, Rwanda has the highest percentage of female members of parliament of any country in the world. They're ahead of Sweden, and Sweden's number 2. So, and you see women in very, very high positions, you know, in many fields. Large numbers of women, for example, in the cabinet, and a focus on raising up the girl child is sort of integrated into lots of Rwandan programs. Women, in terms of the legal obstacles, a lot has changed already. Women now do have the right of inheritance, and that was a legal reform that has been instituted. There are plenty of laws against you know, physical abuse of women, There's a requirement for the girl child to be educated just as the boys. And if you look at the statistics of children going into elementary school, boys and girls are participating at the expected rates. But it's still a traditional African country, and therefore women have many of the traditional drudge jobs, especially in rural areas, that they had to do. And what you find is that girls drop out of school much sooner than boys do. Why? Well, because they're needed back on the farm. They're needed to go fetch water, etc. These are cultural, economic obstacles to education. And the same, I think, is true in terms of issues of sexual violence. You know, it's not that there aren't laws against sexual violence. It's just that, you know, people are loath to bring them forward. Things get hidden in the family, and so you don't know about, you know, as much, and so it doesn't come to law. And there are things that could be done. One of the things, we have a program we're working to try to address the problem of prostitution. As far as anybody can tell me, there has never been a case in which the male client has been charged with a crime in Rwanda. And we've said to them, well, why don't you do that? If prostitution's illegal, and in fact by law, it's both the female and the male are liable to punishment. But it just doesn't work. So there are things that are changing, but I wouldn't argue that it's, and certainly Rwandan women wouldn't argue that that enough has been done. But it's very exciting because there is a very, very high number of well-educated, prominent, vocal women advocates who are part and parcel of society and who you read about all the time. The U.S. government, just as a sort of pat ourselves on the back a little bit, we provide 2,000 scholarships every year to girls for secondary education. And I wish we could double and triple that. I think it's one of the most useful things we do, and it's getting those girls to be able to stay in school is very, very important. In terms of the judiciary and the mediation center, et cetera, I guess there's a lot I still am learning about Rwanda, but the differences between Gacaca and the formal judicial sector are there's a huge barrier between the two. The formal judiciary has been rebuilt, and now you have trained judges, trained prosecutors, but who have still I think there's 240 judges and 195 lawyers in Rwanda for a population of over 8 million people. So you start from there. You talk about the right of the accused to have a defense counsel. Where are they going to come from if you have 195 lawyers and most people can't afford to pay for a lawyer? So the Bar Association has a pro bono program, but they just touch the tip of the iceberg. The judiciary, I'd say, is improving and is seen as more and more independent and not subject to political influence. In Gacaca, we conduct a poll every year of attitudes towards Gacaca, and while I would say that as the Gacaca process has gone on and is longer and longer, the people are getting a bit tired of it. You know, it's intensive and they sort of want to put it behind them. But our polls show that the majority of Rwandans still support the Gacaca process. They think it's important and they support it, and they're trusting that it will bring both justice and national reconciliation. And depending on which group you're talking to, they're either more hopeful of it bringing justice or more hopeful of it bringing national reconciliation. But we polls do show that the Gacaca process is still supported. In terms of the political space, I think you're right, that I think there has been a focus on institutionalizing structures. So now you have an independent judiciary, you have a parliament. One of the things that's interesting is the parliament today holds hearings and calls in cabinet ministers and asks them tough questions and says, what about this policy? Why didn't this happen? What about this report? And that whether that's in terms of economic development, in terms of human rights, in terms of good use of resources, whatever, but you do see that, and it's written up in the newspapers, and you can read about it anytime you want. But I think I think that has been the case, that Rwandans would argue that they needed time to rebuild their society before allowing a full-fledged political competition. There is very much a focus, a belief in consensus in Rwanda. People are kind of supposed to be on the same page, all telling the same story, working in the same direction, trying to achieve the same goals. And the problem I see in Rwanda is that at this stage, there really aren't people who are out there offering alternative policies. For example, if you argue that there's more should be done in rural development and that Kigali gets an unfair or an unreasonable share of the resources, that's a legitimate question. That's not ethnic. That's just, good governance and good policies. But people don't tend to ask those questions, and they certainly don't organize themselves as a political force to say we are the agrarian party. Our goal is to support the farmers. They should. I think that's the kind of area where you can move forward and politically without getting messed up in the ethnic issues. And in terms of trade and liberalization, I don't think there is an industrial future for Rwanda. I don't think it can compete, with its domestic industries. Maybe agribusiness. You can process sugar, or you can have value added to coffee. For example, the washing stations that adds value to coffee. Maybe you can do the same to tea. But Rwanda's future doesn't rely, certainly not on large scale, exports of crops, certainly not to the United States. Maybe they can grow enough wheat, enough rice so that they can export it to Kenya or Uganda or their neighbors, or maybe to the Congo and some of these agribusinesses. But I think they just don't have the resources. Rwanda doesn't have oil. It doesn't have great mineral wealth. It has lots of agriculture, but the land is depleted. It has these small farms. People tell me, people who are much more expert than I, that in many countries you can move towards combining, almost like in a cooperative way, small family plots of land, and then in fact the owner of the land becomes not a laborer but an employee of the institution of the cooperative. That apparently has worked in other parts of Africa. That's one step beyond my level of expertise, but I do think something like that needs to be found to address the resource agriculture problem in the country.
Okay. There's questions right in the middle.
My name is Fidel Lumeya. I'm from Congo, and I work here with the Church World Service. My question is on the tripartite plus. If we can go back a little bit, talk about the security issues in the region. We have, as you mentioned, that beside the FDLR, who is there, we have also the General Nkunda, who is still active. According to what we are receiving as a report coming from the region, he has made some trip to Kigali to meet whoever he wanted to meet in Kigali. I don't know how, if you can make a comment, how the tripartite plus is dealing with these non-state actors, FDLR and then Nkunda. Because for us, it's a danger to come, even if we have election. As long as there is no solution to these two groups, we can slide back to chaos in Congo, thing that we don't want to see.
Thank you. And then right behind. Mm-hmm.
Hi. Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. Barb Soterin from the Army Corps of Engineers. I was wondering, in general, what is the relationship between the security forces and the military with the general population, the Rwandan government, and similar organizations in the regional area, other militaries in the regional area?
Okay. I saw, how about right over here in the middle?
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. My name is Carol Kramer with IFAS, and you I was wondering about your approach. You said you are working with civil society, and how are you? What is your approach? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes, in terms of Congo and Tripartite Plus, and General Nkunda, as far as we know, is in, I don't know, he's somewhere in the Kivus, and he's there, and everybody knows where he is, and he is, the problem is the Congolese government doesn't have the capacity to control him, and I have a hard enough time understanding Rwandan politics. I don't even attempt to try to understand Congolese politics, especially in the Kivus, which is as complicated a challenge as anything I've ever seen. I have great admiration for my colleagues based in Kinshasa who have that task. In terms of the tripartite, one of the things that they're doing, which they haven't finished yet, is to in an early stage of the tripartite process, they agreed that they were going to focus on negative forces in Eastern Congo. And the negative forces are militias. Now, whether that was FDLR is clearly one of them. The Ugandan Lord's Resistance Army was there. For Burundi, it was the FLN. And they agreed that they would identify the key leaders of these negative forces, and amongst all the countries, so you'd have a common list, and then they would do something. They would impose sanctions. They would go to the AU. It wasn't quite clear. That was sort of the next step. And so they've been discussing this list of names, if you will, and that's been going on for a while. And not surprisingly, there are differences. What somebody who belongs on one person's list isn't necessarily acceptable to another country for a whole variety of reasons. But that is one of the ways they are trying to focus on the negative forces. And the whole concept of the fusion cell, which is really an intelligence exchange center in Kisangani. The idea is if news came out that some armed militia were moving in a particular direction, posing a threat to cross borders, attack somebody, everybody would get the same information, they would agree on it, and they would agree to act in some way to prevent that. The premise is that the borders are not to be violated, and that the country should work together to manage the problems in Eastern Congo, because they affect all of them, not just one, not just either Rwanda or Uganda or Burundi, but very much so, especially now the people of the Congo, who are really the ones who are suffering the most from the depredations of these negative forces. So it's a process that's continuing. It's certainly far from being settled, and I think one of the keys is whether, as a result of the elections, the Congolese government will be moving to, as I said earlier, to establish its own authority and to have the Congolese military become much more professional, to actually get paid and to be able to play its part in controlling what happens on its own territory. Because if Nkunda is to be arrested, he ought to be arrested by the Congolese. The last thing you want is the Rwandans getting involved again in cross-border activities. And I'm not sure how best I can answer the question about the security forces, the military. The Rwandan military is very professional. They are seen as a professional force. In Darfur, they're considered by everybody I've spoken to as perhaps the best military unit, the most professional military unit in Darfur. They are downsizing in order to make themselves leaner and meaner, I guess I would say. They have a parallel force. I mean, the internal security is supposed to be the role of the police, and the police are also becoming more professional. We do a lot of police training. The numbers of policemen are going up, which is necessary because of to reach basically international standards of how many policemen per capita. They're working on that. There is a surprising amount of cooperation amongst the military services. You think that, especially with Uganda, where there have been difficulties in the past, Uganda and Rwandan militaries, chiefs of staff, talk to each other, meet each other. Very much is true. The same is true in Burundi. There's a lot of military-to-military cooperation. There isn't military-to-military cooperation with the Congolese yet, And but again, you know, in the long run, that's what's needed to have that. I'm not sure I properly answered that question. If not, I'll just ask me again, and I'll try to do better. In terms of civil society, what are we doing? We have number one, we talk to them a lot, and we try to understand what they're doing. And there are groups, for example, there are several human rights groups, one called Liprador, others who we work with. We have different assistance programs. Through USAID, we attempt to build up civil society through training programs. We don't do a lot of direct financial aid to different civil society groups, but what I find quite interesting is that Rwanda, especially in the last 2 years, has kind of been discovered by many people in the United States. Some of them are church-based groups. Others are just different kinds of NGOs who have, for one reason or another, learned something positive about Rwanda and who come to Rwanda. Different universities. It's really, for me, it's impossible just to keep up. We have so many Americans coming all the time, dealing directly either with the universities, with women's groups, with HIV/AIDS advocacy groups, children's rights groups, you name it. We have all of these groups coming all the time. And what we as an embassy can do, since our resources are limited, one of the things we do is we try to link people together. So if somebody calls me and says, I'm coming, I'd like to find out more about what we could do to work on rural health or work with groups of people infected with HIV/AIDS or with orphans, where do I go? And we connect them to people. So that's one of the relatively easy things we can do to try to address that problem.
Thank you. Right down here.
Hi. Claudia Anyasa, Department of State. I very much appreciated your remarks, and I noticed you talked about peacekeeping in the beginning and how there are Rwandan peacekeepers in southern Sudan and also in Darfur. Has the president or any of his cabinet members tried to use their own experiences with genocide to try to talk to the Sudanese government at all?
Thank you. Right there.
Thank you. Mike Chavis with the U.S. Forest Service. I just wonder if you could discuss a little bit more the land tenure and property rights issues in a country with 90%, I think you said, directly reliant upon the land for their livelihoods, farming on a quarter of a hectare or a little more than that. It seems like this is a sector that could be quite ripe for future conflict, and I wonder what efforts are being made at this point to diffuse those conflicts before they happen.
And right down here.
Hello, Laura Heaton from United Press International. I was hoping that you could talk a little bit more about efforts to bridge ethnic, quote-unquote, ethnic differences among the youth in Rwanda. I was recently there and working with human rights groups in the high schools, and it was my understanding from talking to young activists that Rwandan history is not being taught in the high schools or the primary schools, and it's a great concern of many human rights activists because then you're leaving students and young people who have maybe a vague memory of the genocide to learn about the history of their country from parents who obviously would have a very unbiased opinion of what has happened since 1959. So I was hoping you could talk a little bit more about what specific programs you're aware of when you mentioned earlier that that this curriculum is being taught in the schools. Thank you.
Yeah. Since this is the last round, may I throw in one fourth question that I'd just like to get your response to, Michael? And that is the Great Lakes conference process. That had been held out at one stage as possibly a vehicle to do a number of important things in terms of facilitating regional cooperation and or integration. One of them was the idea of a regional economic compact that could begin the process of regulation, of building an economic regime that would basically regularize the economic transactions as between states. And the second was the notion of a security compact that would address the common security issues that all the states of the region have in common. Could you just indicate your sense about how that initiative is proceeding?
Okay, be happy to. On terms of talking to Sudan, I'm not privy to the details, but I know for a fact that President Kagame has had several conversations with President Bashir about Darfur and the situation there. The Rwandans, given their own history, of course, are terribly concerned about the genocide that's happening in Darfur and are more than willing to do their part. The problems at the moment in Darfur are both political and then structural issues with the AU operation there, with AMIS, financial issues, problems of logistical support, etc., so that the Rwandans are concerned that the force in the AU is not doing what it's supposed to do. It doesn't have the capacity to really go out there and protect individuals who are at risk of being harmed by others. So yes, I think the Rwandans have tried to use their political influence, but it's that's looking at it. If you look at it from the Sudanese side, it's a place I'm not able to go because I don't know enough about it. But clearly, the U.S. government is very, very concerned about the difficulties we've all been facing in trying to find a long-term political solution to the problems of Darfur, and that's ultimately what's needed. People write books about land tenure, and I'm. Although I have had several briefings and I've been involved and I've met with the people who are working on land tenure reform, it still is a tough thing to summarize. What I can say is that a couple big things. Land. People did not have title to land in Rwanda. It was all traditional, and now one of the things they're doing is they are going to provide title to land, and the way they do it is going to be different in the urban areas than it is in the rural areas. In urban areas, everything is going to be clearly demarcated, and it's going to be not unlike what you would have here in the United States. In rural areas, it's going to be more traditional, but they're not. But everybody's going to know, that particular plot of land there is, belongs to that family as opposed to this family. The problems are that the real problems in Rwanda tend to be internal family. There are huge numbers of land disputes. Most of the cases that are in the formal court system are land cases, and they tend to be between family members, between uncles and nephews and et cetera, et cetera. And that how you resolve that is a big challenge. But in addition, though, in terms of land reform, you're putting value on. They're going to have a way of valuing land, so that it's bankable, if you will. You can go and get a mortgage. You have collateral in the banking sector. They're also looking at if there's unused land, the government does have by law a right to expropriate land for the common good, but only if they pay a fair market value. So there are a whole series. I think there are a couple land laws that have already been adopted, and 5 or 6 or 8 implementing elements of the land reform that are still being worked on. And it is, you're absolutely right, it's in terms of the future of the economy of the country, it's absolutely critical. And that's why we and the British are working very intently with the Rwandan government to try to figure out a way on how they move forward. You may be right in terms of the details of whether history is or is not taught in schools. It is definitely taught. I know all students who are going to college have to go to a summer camp program, in effect. Well, Rwandan history is very much taught. And, one of the reasons, the justifications for the genocide was that, the old history was that the Tutsis were not Rwandans. They came from Ethiopia or wherever it was they came, and they were brought in as interlopers, so they're not truly Rwandans. And people talk about that, the way that history was taught in the past, frequently. People talk to me about it all the time. My guess is what you'll find in this is that maybe it isn't taught as the way you would expect it to be taught in elementary and secondary schools, because there aren't any textbooks. I mean, part of it is just, again, capacity in the educational system. I've gone to schools in the rural areas. There's 40 copies of a basic arithmetic book, for 300 kids, and they're parceled out during the day and they're collected and they're locked up at night. So kids don't have enough textbooks just to go around. But I think it's if it isn't taught, and you're correct, and as much as it should be, it's not. I would argue I don't think it's through a conscious government decision to avoid facing their history. In fact, everything I see, it's just the opposite. People assume that the only way you can avoid repeats of the past is to recognize what did happen in history and to educate people so that it doesn't happen again. And then I guess the last question had to do with the Great Lakes Conference process. For those of you who don't know, this is a process that has been underway now for a couple of years, and it includes a very large number of countries. I was surprised the other day to learn that it includes Sudan. I didn't know Sudan was part of the Great Lakes area, but I guess it is. And the goal is there's supposed to be a summit meeting in Nairobi in November. I think it's in November, maybe early December. And in the last couple of years, there has been a negotiating process financed by the Canadians and the Dutch, bringing together all of these African countries' representatives with the goal of agreeing on major intergovernmental agreements, and then a structure, setting up some kind of a secretariat. And there are agreements on security, on economic cooperation, etc. What it all adds up to in the end is I'm afraid I can't judge at this stage. We, the U.S. government, we're observers in the process. A lot has been agreed to, I understand, and that there is an intent to have this summit meeting, at which point the countries of the region will agree to a big framework agreement, and then I think each of these different protocols that are underneath that will have to be implemented kind of one by one, and you might be able to sort of cherry pick, if this one is ripe for implementation, but this one needs more work. I'm not quite sure. It's a parallel process. It's nothing the U.S. is opposed to, but we're just we tend to be a little more skeptical of big, umbrella type agreements that involve lots of countries and tend to go to the lowest common denominator rather than perhaps being the most effective way of moving forward very quickly. Right.
Well, Ambassador Arrietty, I want to just thank you so much for providing a very comprehensive overview on a subject that has not been widely discussed in recent last couple of years, I think, in the Washington policy community. There are many excellent questions were raised. I can think of another dozen questions, and I'm sure others in the audience would still like to put on the table, but I'm afraid our time has come to the end. But I want to thank you very much for being here today, and to thank all of the members of our audience for engaging in this very important conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure. Very well informed.
Hi. You're going out to Bernie, I understand.
Yes, hi. Yes, I know your name, and I heard from you. I heard from Kigali. Unfortunately, I just didn't have time. I hope this was.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And also,